I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
King Charles had navigated family rebellion, public scandals, and personal betrayals throughout his long life in the public eye. But nothing could have ever prepared him for the confidential folder placed directly onto his polished desk that tense morning. Inside the dark binder were restricted banking records carrying high-level royal identifiers, private authorization codes, and one name appearing again and again on almost every page: Queen Camilla. As Prince William stood in the dimly lit office reading the final summary aloud with absolute precision, the king did not utter a single word of defense. He did not move, nor did he wave away the accusations. He simply stared across the table at the woman he had spent decades protecting, completely frozen in disbelief. Before diving deeper into what this explosive financial discovery really means for the stability of the crown, ensure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss another royal update. William had entered the restricted briefing room at Buckingham Palace carrying the thick black folder firmly beneath his arm. He had been urgently summoned after senior royal auditors flagged irregular monetary movements passing through monarchy-linked trust funds, private financial reserves originally created to hold funds specifically designated for official crown duties. King Charles had initially entered the room expecting a dull, routine discussion regarding outdated administrative procedures, while Camilla expected the whole matter to quietly dissolve behind complex palace legalities. Neither of them understood that the Prince of Wales had already spent weeks painstakingly tracing every single wire transfer and authorization stamp. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut, the entire atmosphere changed. William placed the black folder onto the table, flipped it open directly to a signed approval page, and pushed it toward his father. He asked the monarch one direct, unyielding question. Did he recognize the private authorization code listed beside the transfers? Charles looked down, reading the line once, and then reading it again. His hands trembled slightly as he removed his reading glasses. No denial came from his lips, and no command was issued to shut down the meeting. The sovereign set his glasses on the wooden surface and turned his gaze toward the queen consort with a heavy, suffocating silence that carried far more weight than explosive anger. Camilla finally broke the silence, her voice tight as she insisted that the accounts had merely been established as a financial shield to protect broader royal interests during politically unstable moments, rather than an attempt to undermine the crown. Yet her defensive explanation only deepened the personal wound. Charles had spent decades defending her place at the heart of the royal family against public hostility, and now, massive sums of money appeared to have been quietly shifted beneath his sovereign authority without his knowledge. William watched his father's face pale, realizing this was no longer a simple accounting error. It had transformed into a devastating betrayal occurring inside the marriage itself. The evidence grew darker as more pages were turned. One specific account carried the internal administrative title continuity reserve, a label implying emergency funding in the event of a national crisis or major disruption to the monarchy. However, the listed beneficiaries did not include King Charles, Prince William, Kate Middleton, or any of their young children. Even more troubling was the timeline. Several major approvals had been signed shortly before bitter, highly publicized family disputes, making the reserve look less like a protective shield for the crown and more like a private financial weapon prepared well in advance. William looked directly at his father and explained that these transfers were neither random nor isolated. Someone exceptionally close to Camilla's private office had actively helped build the entire financial structure. Someone with enough internal authority to move through her personal corridors without ever being questioned by palace security. The king remained motionless, but his initial shock rapidly hardened into something far colder. The hidden accounts were financially alarming, but the names attached to the approval codes turned what could have been a bureaucratic audit into a painful, deeply personal act of treachery. This was no longer just about palace money. It was about a husband who had believed that loyalty and peace had finally been achieved in his personal life, a wife who had spent years quietly securing her own future, and a future king who suddenly feared that the institution he was destined to inherit had been compromised from within. Charles, Camilla, and William had entered that room as a unified family unit, but within minutes, they were eyeing each other as strategic rivals. Charles felt the physical weight of the situation first. He had tied his personal happiness and public reputation to the belief that Camilla could be completely trusted. The monarchy was built on public confidence, duty, and clear lines of succession. If hidden accounts had been set up right under his nose, the damage extended far beyond their marital vows. It struck at the very heart of his authority as king. William carried a much colder, more calculating burden. He wasn't just defending his father. He was fiercely protecting Kate, George, Charlotte, and Louis from secret financial arrangements designed without their knowledge or consent. To William, the crown represented legal authority, private property, and long-term security. Any shadow trust established outside official channels could fundamentally alter his children's future before he ever took the throne. When the senior advisors were dismissed, Camilla turned toward William, asking if he had been secretly investigating her personal office. Though her tone remained controlled, her underlying fury was unmistakable. William closed the folder and answered calmly that he had simply followed the trail of the money, and her name was waiting for him at the end of the line. Charles gripped the arms of his chair, watching his wife and heir face off like sworn adversaries. Camilla felt backed into a corner, while William viewed her intense reaction as absolute proof that the secrecy had been deliberate. Charles wanted to shield her, yet every royal duty dictated that his son's evidence could not be ignored. The records offered no relief. They listed charitable organizations, external private wealth consultants, former household staff, and a heavily protected secondary trust. In legal terms, a trust manages assets for designated beneficiaries, but the ultimate recipient of this specific fund had been deliberately concealed behind encrypted entries. William turned to another page and paused. Kate Middleton's private household was mentioned only once. It was not listed as a recipient of any funds. Instead, written directly beside her entry were 4 chilling words: future financial obstacle. Camilla immediately looked away, and seeing her reaction, suspicion fully hardened within the king. William immediately ordered the forensic auditors to track down exactly who had written that note. The initial paper trail led back several months, not to a quiet banking boardroom, but to a private royal gathering held at Windsor Castle. To truly comprehend why Kate's household was labeled an obstacle, William knew he had to look back to the exact moment Camilla decided that her future financial independence could no longer be left to chance or to the goodwill of the future king. Every royal crisis contains a moment that appears completely harmless when it occurs. A sentence spoken too softly in a crowded room, a look held a second too long between courtiers, or an administrative decision dismissed as minor protocol. Months before Prince William opened the hidden audit accounts, one private ceremony at Windsor Castle quietly altered the course of royal relationships. Few people present that afternoon understood its true significance. Yet it was there, beneath polite applause and carefully managed royal etiquette, that Queen Camilla made the fateful decision that would eventually leave King Charles frozen in silence. Tension had already been steadily accumulating between Camilla's private office and the established household of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Staffing assignments had turned into subtle power struggles, and control over charitable foundations had become a battleground for long-term influence inside Buckingham Palace. Most dangerous of all was the quiet dispute over future financial independence. Monarchy-linked funds reserved specifically for Kate Middleton and her children were designed to protect the future king's family from internal political pressure. William had repeatedly rejected internal proposals that would have placed those specific reserves under centralized supervisory control, firmly believing that George, Charlotte, and Louis needed financial protection long before he ever inherited the crown. Kate supported his stance quietly, fully aware that control over private assets could easily translate into control over public access and official duties. The breaking point arrived during a private investiture rehearsal inside Windsor Castle. King Charles attended alongside a small group of senior aides, expecting a brief review of routine ceremonial protocol. Camilla waited until the final schedule was being discussed, then calmly requested that a long-standing trust fund supporting Kate's future royal duties be placed under her own temporary administrative supervision. William refused immediately. His tone was restrained, but his answer was final. Camilla slowly removed her gloves, set them onto the table, and looked directly into the eyes of the future king, declaring that if that was his decision, another parallel structure would simply have to be created. Charles brushed the remark aside as mere momentary frustration, urging his son not to turn a minor procedural disagreement into a bitter family conflict. But William heard a distinct warning. Later that evening at Adelaide Cottage, William confided in Kate, explaining that the Queen Consort had begun thinking far beyond her ceremonial obligations, actively searching for financial authority outside the traditional chain of command. Kate felt a deep sense of dread rather than anger, fearing that a public war over money would alienate the king from his heir at the worst possible moment, weakening both men and leaving the entire institution exposed to outside scrutiny. The warning became a reality within 48 hours. A hidden bank account was established under a neutral administrative label designed to avoid automatic palace auditing procedures. The accountant tasked with managing the new structure was rapidly transferred into Camilla's private office and instructed to report through a sealed, internal communication channel. William later uncovered the account's first major wire transfer, which had been used to pay for a highly confidential legal assessment. That legal document examined precisely how much independent financial authority Camilla could legally retain if the reins suddenly changed. When William eventually brought that confidential assessment into their next private meeting, the escalating feud could no longer be masked by polite language or traditional royal courtesy. William insisted on meeting Camilla without lawyers, advisors, or press secretaries present, wanting no prepared excuses or sanitized palace rhetoric. Charles insisted on attending, and once the heavy doors locked, the hidden accounts ceased being abstract numbers on a page. They became direct, burning accusations spoken across a table by a son to his father's wife. The legal review confirmed William's worst suspicions. It outlined specific procedures to preserve Camilla's personal control over selected trusts if Charles ever became incapacitated or unable to perform his full monarchical duties. To the Prince of Wales, this was not a protective measure. It was the secret construction of an independent power base designed to bypass the future sovereign. William slid the document across the table, asking her point-blank if she had been preparing for his father's tragic absence or for his own eventual reign. Camilla's silence broke into visible anger. She accused William of treating her like an unwelcome intruder despite her decades of loyal service to the crown. She maintained that the accounts were safeguards created out of necessity, arguing that she had never believed William would protect her interests once he became king. The Queen Consort insisted that personal security could not rely on mere goodwill, especially when the heir apparent had never fully trusted her intentions. William refused to back down, stating that while fear might explain her actions, it could never justify secret transfers, concealed beneficiaries, and hidden legal structures kept entirely from the king himself. Charles finally spoke, his voice low and trembling as he asked his wife why she had never brought these anxieties to him directly. Camilla replied softly that he would have refused her request to protect his son's feelings. Those words cut far deeper than any financial document. The king had spent half his life fighting for her place beside him, yet she had constructed a secret financial fallback system based on the premise that his authority and protection could not be relied upon. Although Camilla admitted to approving the trust creation, she claimed she was unaware of the massive scale of the recent transfers, attempting to place the blame on a senior financial advisor who had allegedly expanded the network beyond her original scope. William immediately opened another section of the binder, pointing out that her personal authorization code appeared on every single major transaction over the past year. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Recognizing the gravity of the betrayal, Charles issued a direct order suspending Camilla's private financial signing privileges immediately. The king hoped this sharp command would contain the crisis, but William knew the damage ran much deeper. He warned his father that several key trust mechanisms had already been activated and might no longer answer to Buckingham Palace authority. Charles had spoken as a sovereign, but the complex financial network built around the money was about to reveal that actual control over the funds had already quietly shifted elsewhere. Camilla may have authorized the accounts, but she had not built them alone. Behind every transaction stood experienced wealth managers, estate lawyers, and legal advisors who understood the loopholes of royal trusts. William had uncovered an entire administrative network engineered to survive internal palace conflict. As Charles tried to dismantle the structure, a brutal reality emerged. Royal authority was absolute within the palace, but private legal trusts were governed by external corporate laws that did not automatically yield to a monarch's spoken command. Royal legal officers warned the king that while basic accounts could be frozen quickly, secondary trusts were shielded by independent trustees. Individuals legally bound to act in the interests of named beneficiaries regardless of royal decrees. Camilla's funds had been split across charitable trusts, private estate accounts, and contingency reserves, making it nearly impossible to strip away without exposing the entire royal family to massive public scandal. William demanded total unreserved disclosure, warning that any hesitation would give the trustees time to relocate assets, clear paper trails, or invoke protective legal clauses. Charles hesitated, trapped in an agonizing dilemma. Full public disclosure would obliterate Camilla's public standing and expose how completely unaware he had been regarding operations conducted under his own roof. The king feared the resulting scandal would destroy public confidence in his leadership. Sitting alone in his private study late that night, Charles held two official suspension orders. He signed the first with a heavy hand, but paused halfway through the second. His pen hovered over the parchment as he quietly asked a trusted aide whether protecting his wife meant failing his son and his duty to the crown. The courtier offered no answer, leaving the king alone with the crushing weight of his decision. By sunrise the following morning, the internal financial conflict could no longer be contained within the private corridors of Buckingham Palace. Access codes were revoked, confidential administrative staff were interrogated by internal security, and outside trustees suddenly stopped answering calls from royal legal officers. The daily machinery of royal life continued for the public eye, but the family at its core had been fundamentally shattered. King Charles had lost total confidence in the woman beside him. Prince William had completely run out of patience with his father's hesitation, and Queen Camilla was about to discover how rapidly power evaporates when palace doors silently stop opening. William ordered a comprehensive audit of every single bank account, property agreement, and secondary trust connected to Camilla's private office. He demanded that all digital records be preserved, wire transfers suspended, and every external inquiry from corporate trustees reported directly to his team. Charles reluctantly approved revoking all financial signing authority from Camilla's administrative staff, meaning they could no longer allocate or approve funds linked to royal duties without explicit approval. Yet the king harbored growing resentment toward the relentless speed of his son's intervention. Charles feared that William was already acting like a ruling monarch before the crown had officially passed to him. The king recognized the severity of the security breach, but he was also watching his long marriage crumble under intense legal scrutiny. William, however, saw only the immense danger of further delay. Over £2 million had already been quietly shifted into a protected offshore trust, and he refused to lose another penny while senior courtiers debated optical damage and media strategy. In a private, recorded conversation preserved by Kate's household secretary, William admitted that protecting his father's emotional well-being could not come at the expense of ignoring deliberate deception. Kate heard the intense frustration in her husband's voice, but she also recognized profound grief. The future king was not trying to destroy his father. He was waging war against the culture of silence that had left the entire monarchy vulnerable. Camilla felt the harsh new reality before anyone officially explained it to her. As she approached her personal administrative suite that afternoon, she found her electronic keycard disabled. A palace guard respectfully informed her that the lock override had been issued under direct royal authority. The queen consort stood frozen for a long moment before asking if her senior administrative staff had also been locked out. The guard confirmed that they had. Camilla returned to her private quarters, dismissed her remaining aides, and sat entirely alone. She unpinned a heavy royal brooch from her coat, placing it on the table as if the physical symbol of authority had suddenly become too painful to carry. For the first time, she truly understood that her suspension was not a temporary diplomatic gesture. Her institutional power had been severed. The forensic investigation quickly uncovered the true destination of the missing £2 million. The money had not been spent or moved overseas for personal luxury. It had been funneled into a specialized legal trust designed to fund an independent household, security staff, and personal residences for Camilla after the end of Charles's reign. A secondary clause within the trust guaranteed substantial annual payouts to two of her close non-royal family members for a period of 10 years, completely shielded from future royal vetoes. King Charles read the final audit report in absolute silence. He then issued one final instruction. He demanded to see Camilla alone. After days of legal threats, forensic reports, and intense accusations, the ultimate fate of their marriage would hinge on a private conversation without advisors, titles, or places to hide. Charles cleared the room of all red boxes, official paperwork, and waiting aides. This meeting was not about constitutional authority. It was about personal trust. When Camilla entered, she prepared herself for a cold, regal judgment. Instead, she found a deeply wounded husband who simply wanted to know if their decades together had ever felt secure enough for her, or if she had been constantly preparing for the day he could no longer shield her from the world. Charles already understood the core finding. Camilla had constructed the secret reserve to guarantee her future lifestyle and family support after a change of reign, the moment one monarch dies and another takes the throne. The accounts were not designed to overthrow William, but they were built to survive his future reign entirely outside his control. Charles asked her gently when she had stopped trusting him. Camilla answered through a private recorded statement later archived by the royal household. She stated that she had never stopped trusting him, but she had long stopped trusting what would happen after his death. Her words landed with quiet, devastating force. Charles reminded her of the immense personal and political cost he had paid to defend her throughout their lives, placing his reputation and happiness alongside hers. Fear of William, he insisted, could never justify deceiving the man who had stood between her and every public storm. Camilla finally admitted the full truth. She confessed that she believed the Prince of Wales would strip away her royal security, her home, and her standing the moment he inherited the throne. That deep-seated fear had evolved into desperation. Desperation had turned into strategic planning, and planning had hardened into complete secrecy. Charles felt his remaining anger collapse into immense sorrow. He reached toward her hand, but stopped himself before making contact. The affection remained, but the foundation of trust was utterly broken. Love could survive betrayal, but absolute confidence could not be restored simply because both parties wished for it. Realizing the game was over, Camilla surrendered. She agreed to dissolve the protected trusts, cancel the 10-year family payout guarantees, and hand over a complete list of all external wealth managers involved in the scheme. She asked for only one thing in return. She did not want Charles to defend her actions publicly, but she asked him to privately acknowledge that years of intense hostility within the royal family had bred the very fear that drove her choices. William accepted the complete surrender of the assets, but the internal shockwaves had already leaked outside the palace gates. By the following morning, the private crisis had become a public scandal. The palace released a brief statement regarding an ongoing internal financial review, but the language was far too guarded and the sudden cancellation of official engagements too obvious. National broadcasters interrupted scheduled programming, news outlets cleared their front pages, and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace watching blacked-out vehicles arrive and depart. The public reaction was swift and divided. Supporters of Charles argued that the king had acted with decisive integrity the moment the irregularities were brought to light. Critics countered that his personal devotion had allowed a shadow financial system to operate unchecked directly beneath his authority. William faced intense commentary as well. While many praised the prince for enforcing transparency and protecting the future crown, others accused him of ruthlessly humiliating his father during the twilight of his reign. The crisis culminated on the front page of a major national newspaper, featuring a photograph of Charles leaving Buckingham Palace under the headline, "The King Who Never Knew." Beside it was a smaller photo of William arriving with his black audit binder. The stark contrast spoke volumes. One man bore the heavy burden of discovery, while the other carried the public shame of oversight. Charles watched the news broadcast from his private study, turned off the television, and remarked to an aide that the humiliation was his alone to bear because the system had been created under his roof. In the end, King Charles issued his final decree without public fanfare or ceremonial spectacle. He formally dissolved the Continuity Reserve, revoked every protected beneficiary clause, and placed all recovered funds into an independently audited royal trust. Independent oversight meant external auditors would review every transaction without political interference from any family member. Furthermore, William was granted permanent oversight rights over any financial trust affecting Kate, their children, or the future line of succession, ensuring no parallel financial structure could ever be created again. Charles brought Camilla and William together for one final meeting. He placed the signed dissolution papers on the table and declared that the secret accounts were officially closed. The outside advisors were terminated, the hidden protections erased, and the monarchical precedent firmly established. The crown would never again operate through covert channels governed by fear. Camilla accepted the ruling, retaining her official title and personal place beside the king, but permanently losing all independent authority over royal funds. William did not celebrate the victory. He assured his father that protecting the crown had required absolute truth, not personal vengeance. Charles acknowledged his own failure in allowing his protective instincts to blind him to the growing secrecy. Though deeply scarred, the monarch refused to let betrayal define the end of his marriage or the legacy of his reign. Love had survived, though trust would now have to be rebuilt under strict, uncompromising rules. William retrieved the black audit folder, handed it to a senior archivist for permanent vault storage, and quietly exited the room. King Charles and Queen Camilla remained seated together in silence. Neither reached out to hold the other's hand, but neither walked away. The recovered millions were permanently redirected toward public charities, transforming a secret reserve born of fear into a visible, lasting act of institutional accountability.